I was searching, I was looking. I had a best friend who had died, and I had no answers to why that may have happened. Found I had quite an intuitive ability, I think, or psychic ability that might be called in those days. And it felt that that was too loose and that had no boundaries or containers. So astrology, when I discovered, I thought, oh, well, I can see symbols.
Well, hello and welcome. Welcome to another episode of the Finding Equilibrium show. Delighted to be here, delighted that you're here, and delighted that my guest today is Brian Clark. Now, I met Brian a few months ago now when I was in the UK. I had the great honor of going to an astrology summer school in Oxford University. It was an incredible experience, I have to say. And part of that experience was one of our tutors was Brian. And Brian is an astrologer who's been practicing for many years. He's written 7 books, taught many people in Australia and around the world. His work has really inspired and energized many people. So I'm delighted to welcome Brian to the show today. Good morning, Brian. How are you?
Good morning, and thank you. As I said before, remembering that wonderful week we had in Oxford.
It was great. It was really great studying astrology at Oxford University, because of course that's where it would have been studied, 500 years ago. It felt very natural, I have to say. But for people who aren't familiar with your work, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about your story. How did you come to be an astrologer, who is very passionate about the whole realm of symbolism, because of course astrology is symbolism. I'd love you to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you. It's been a while. Dare I say, perhaps when I was first introduced to astrology was the early 70s, and that happened because I was searching, I was looking. I had a best friend who had died, and I had no answers to why that may have happened. Not that there would be any more today, but so as a passionate young 20-year-old, I was looking for some answers and discovered many things along the way. Found I had quite an intuitive ability, I think, or psychic ability that might be called in those days. And it felt that that was too loose and that had no boundaries or containers. So astrology, when I discovered, I thought, oh, well, I can see symbols and I can see. And then over time that developed because I met a community of astrologers. We have, as you experience, a great community worldwide. I'm from Canada originally, so this was in Canada. And so fate brought me to Australia through relationship, and here I am. So I guess how I discovered it, it discovered me, I would say, but it's given me the richness of being able to explore and live my life with a map that helps me understand the deeper expressions of life, if you will. So it's very hard to answer your question, Florence. Let me say that it found me and has always been a constant companion for me. But it is the symbols, the archetypes, the stories, the myths. So I went back and studied classics and archaeology and got my master's in classics and archaeology because it was the symbols and the stories and the myths of one's life that I heard. And just to finalize, I guess to say I've been a professional by that, but I mean, I made my living and then brought up my kids and everything like that with astrology since the since the early 80s, since 1982.
Amazing. So many years. And astrology, I feel, is becoming more popular now. I mean, do you get that sense, having sort of been involved for a long period? Do you feel that it's becoming more popular now with younger people?
Yeah, well, it comes in waves. Certainly I was very lucky because there was a wave in the 80s and 90s, and that wave I always feel like I was able to ride that wave because in those days we were interested in symbols, Jung. There was a whole explosion of thinking around archetypal areas and ways of deepening our own inner process and so on. So that was a huge wave. And then again, that wave kind of turned in the early years of this millennium onto kind of a more traditional. There was a huge kind of reversal going back to traditional astrology and reviving a lot of the books that had never been translated. And so now we had another kind of aspect into astrology. We went through a psychological and then we're going through a traditional. And I would agree, yes, there's a lot of people today, because of Facebook, internet, all that, that find astrology. However, I would like to say, if I may, given my age, that the kind of superficiality of astrology kind of it remains in the media. You've got to hold it in a private space. You can't put it out there all the time. It has to be held in the sacred context of you sitting with a client and hearing the story. It's very private. And teaching astrology is also incredibly private because you have to hold the responses of your students. And so I see it as a sacred science, as a sacred art, not kind of something we can put onto the internet. And here I am doing a podcast.
No, but it is, I completely
that
agree
out.
with that. Yeah, I completely agree with that. It is a sacred science because it's a great, when you read charts as I'm doing now, it's a great honor, a great privilege because you really are seeing into someone's soul, really. I mean, you really are. I mean, it's an incredible honor. And I can see how in a popular way, you know, we talk about zodiac horoscopes and those types of things that that are interesting, but that the depth that you get when you actually have your chart read and when you actually read someone's chart is incredible.
Well, because in that space, what happens, and that can lead me now more back to your original question, to say that when I first started, you know, I would try to describe the chart. Well, this is, and then all of a sudden something else would happen that would trigger something in the client, a memory, an experience, oftentimes that they rarely shared, and in few cases that they had never shared. And something changed in that moment. It wasn't about now this means that. And you realize you're sitting in the presence of a person's story, a larger story of their life, a larger story of their experience of faith. And so witnessing that developed many questions inside myself about what this process is of astrological consultation and what this process is of really sitting with the client in terms of their chart and their symbols. And so the story for me opened up onto much larger ground. I oftentimes wondered if I really was an astrologer because I couldn't ever say this means that. I could never say, well, listen, Lawrence, you've got this and this, and that means that. I could never say that.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I want to move on now and talk about family because, of course, astrology there's so many applications because it looks at whole life. But from a family point of view, this is an area that that we talked about in the course that you ran when we were in Oxford. But maybe a starting point is from an astrological point of perspective. From your perspective, what is a family? How do we describe and define it?
Well, we can think about a family in so many ways, can't we? But and how it's shifted certainly through time. But we think about it, I think about it as a system, as a constellation of people involved in a kind of an emotional and attached way. Now, when we say attachment, that attachment oftentimes is through kinship. It's through oftentimes biological bond, but not always biological bond, because we can have you know, half siblings, step siblings, we can have step parents. So there's a kind of a sense where we're in a kind of an emotional attachment. There's a kind of a sense of dependency on one another in this particular system. And when we use the word attachment, that's not always a kind of sense of a close attachment. It can be an attachment that's also quite avoidant. And so it's a system. I like to think of it, as I said, as a constellation, and every person in that constellation is part of the system, a part of the group. And so in that system, it becomes a kind of social microcosm for us to begin to understand how we will relate to the wider world. Yeah, so I look at it, so family astrology, so my wife is a family therapist, and so we developed a lot of work together in family, because as I would listen to my clients' stories, they were always, not always, but I would say many
Often.
of them, about their sibling.
Mm.
You know what the real secret is, Lawrence, is I guess therapists would tell you that your clients also mirror your own story. So you think you're dealing with their stories, you're really also at the end of the day thinking, oh my goodness, I'm dealing with my story. So everybody is dealing with their family story in this consultation. So I came across many stories about siblings, and many stories about parents, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, and many of the kind of interactions which were also archetypally resonant in the charts I was looking at. So I began to sort of think about all the planets in terms of archetypal representations of family members. Now, we already know that the sun has always been associated with father mainly, the moon, mother mainly. But I started to think about Mercury in terms of the sibling and the sibling story. Venus is a sister story. Mars is a brother story. So Jupiter is the stories in the family around the culture, around the philosophies, the beliefs, and Saturn around the rules and regulations. So every kind of part of the chart could remind me of the resonances of family situations. Because don't forget that birth chart is a birth chart of one's moment of renaissance, one's moment of being, one's moment of entry into this system of the family. And so from that chart's point of view, I began to see the whole family constellation. Of course, with my wife's help, she could say, well, that's what they say in family therapy. That's what they do, you know. And so it started to resonate.
So interesting. And how can someone use astrology to help them understand the relationships or the dynamics within the family group, to help them understand, and then obviously with awareness comes opportunity to resolve?
Yeah, I think it helps us to reflect on the images of our life. Like, you know, whereas, you know, like I often said to the students when we started, I say, now listen, you've been blaming your parents for the things that happened to you, and then you find astrology and you blame your planets. But, you know, so it's not your parents or your planets, you know, it's the way that we can reflect and bring reflection and consideration. So I try to then open up the conversation around the consideration. But people have had very difficult experiences in family, and they see that as a cause-effect relationship. This happened, and therefore, and that is also very true. But astrology offers us this larger picture that says there's a sense of fate. Now, fate not meaning that, you know, like you're destined to this to happen, but that this is a part of your process as you move through time. And so I try to develop images. Like, for instance, you know, you see Pluto in the fourth house or something. You realize immediately there's an image of a basement, there's an image of something dark, there's an image of something underneath the family, there's images of ancestral shadows lurking around. Now, those are just images. That doesn't mean that anything is going to happen, but how are those images going to influence this person's understanding of their family? Maybe that's why their responses, why they often felt anxious, or maybe why they felt fearful. Nothing that had happened in the family to them, but that there was an ancestral image that lurked. Or they may have had a simple statement in their chart, like a Saturn moon, you know, and think that their mother was controlling. Hold it a minute here. I start to talk to them about their sense of safety and boundary, and how they might have asked unconsciously for that to happen in the family. So without going any farther, I would just try to support their image, try to support them in looking at their chart so they consider more of what that might mean for them in a bigger sphere. Does that?
Amazing, amazing. Yeah. I guess what I hear you say when you speak is, and this is how I use astrology, it's like it gives you, it's like a diagnostic tool, isn't it? It gives you insights, it tells you kind of where things are,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that then creates the meaning through your own story. I mean, that certainly happened to me. Just I noticed some some particular relationships in my chart, which helped me understand the physical relationships. It helped. It was like a real aha moment for me.
It tells us, I mean, this is where astrology is quite a fascinating field. It tells us the archetypal territory.
Mm,
It doesn't tell us, it doesn't, you go, now you can tell me the story, but as I hear your story in this archetypal territory, I can then begin to mirror back the landscape, the archetype. I don't know specifically what happened, but I can hear the symbols in what happened and feed those and mirror those back, if that makes sense. So it's not anything that's literal, but it can be reflected by the literal world. So we deal with these images and stories, and all of a sudden a person sees, oh yes, that's happened to me. But that's just a reflection of what's been saying. I haven't said this happened to you, but they say, oh, that happened to me. Because they can hear the symbols and the images in the story. And then we can begin to move back and forth between the outer and the inner world. And certainly, as you would know, in your field, that's what creates
mm.
the balance, the sense of the inner and the outer become symbiotic. You see, that's what the part of the family teaches us. We're symbiotic. We're in touch. We are in a field where we're picking up our parents' field. We're picking up our siblings' field. We are part of a natural world in the family. Now that teaches us that we're part of a symbiotic world out there, that, life outside of us, trees and rocks and other people respond to us in this way.
Mm.
So this is where it becomes quite dynamic, I think.
Yes. No, I really love that. It highlights how interconnected we all are. So the family unit, I love the way you talk about it as a system. We are connected. Some people through the journey of their life feel they need to leave that family unit and go somewhere else. But I think that's really one of the things I've learned with astrology. When you look at people through the lens of astrology, you realize how full of challenges we are. You want to kind of go this way, but you also want to stay home. I want to travel the world, but I also want to, and it's all about finding balance. The choices you make as you travel through your life journey is about finding the point of balance between those tensions.
I think that I'd like to take that idea that you said about, so we might leave the family, and well, we it never leaves us. We might leave it, but so there's always exits and entrances. And the core of family teaches us two very important things in life. I mentioned the attachment, and now you brought up the other idea of separation. I'm separate. I'm attached, but I'm separate. Now, sometimes that gets so meshed, I got to get physically away just to experience it, but it's still in us because it's part of us. So I guess what I hear when you say leave, it's so important for us to recognize that we don't leave our families. We really don't. So I guess that's why I'm always trying to help. I'm not suggesting I want to repair everything and make everything. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm suggesting that I think it's important for us to realize that it never leaves us. We may never resolve it, unfortunately, but it doesn't. But we should try our best internally to try and have some peace with it.
No, I love that. One thing that also struck me was we look at our family, our immediate family, but you touched on it before, the ancestral family is very much kind of seen, particularly through the Chiron in a chart, that placement doesn't necessarily only indicate your own challenges, so your own wound, but also the challenges from previous generations.
Absolutely. So we have, when we think about a planet or a planetoid like Chiron, Chiron tells us the archetype, that, and that is very much ancestral, because it's ancient, it's primordial. Let's say it's more primordial, indigenous, like I would say, like Chiron's like the indigeneity of who I am, where I came from. That's all my part, my tribe. Chiron's my tribe. But also in the chart, we have what we call houses. And we use those houses as images, if you will, of place. Now, we know how very important place is, like you feel comfortable here, you don't feel comfortable there. And so we have a place of family, we have a place of ancestry, and we have a place, that goes right back in the chart. The 12th house goes right back from our own ancestry into the collective. So, like, how far back do we go? And if we go far back enough, you and I are related, so is everyone else.
We're all we're all related and all connected.
But you brought something up there that I also think is so fascinating in family astrology. Is like if I now do the chart of my father, for instance. Oh my God, well, he's got a Gemini moon, which is the same degree as my ascendant. I do this, I do the image of my mother. Oh, my mother's got her son exactly the degree of my IC. So you can see that every time you do you and your sister's chart, there's a connection. And that connection through astrology helps us highlight the interaction, the energy that's exchanged in this particular system. So I also see in terms of family, that these contexts are important. So just a quick interesting experience. So my wife being an astrologer and a family therapist, we used to see families. So we'd have the mother and father and the 3 children sitting in the room with the 2 of us. And this was ridiculous because we had, like, I can't tell you how many charts we had. We had the 5 charts of the family, progress, transits, interactions. We didn't do too many of those. We saw couples, that was okay because 2 of us seen 2 of them. But we recognized that in each horoscope was the family. And what really the person wanted to do was talk about their relationship with the family. What we need to do was send families off to family therapists who needed to deal with something. But when somebody wanted to talk about family, we only needed their chart. It was there.
Wow. So I'm curious to understand how that would work. Like with a family unit sitting in a room together and you've got all their charts and you're talking to them about them, but in the context of other people being there. It's an interesting
it certainly was. And I think that was part of my training and my learning was that, only one issue could be dealt with. Yeah, it wasn't like, oh, you've got this, you've got that, because then it just becomes this information overload. And so we could see that there was always one theme we keep coming back to, and each person would reflect on that theme. But it was difficult to contain because what happens, unfortunately, with astrology is that it can produce so much information. And unless the client is aware enough of what they want and where they want to go, you're going to be moving back and forth through all kinds of different places you don't see at this moment.
Yeah.
So it taught me to focus, taught me to use one chart. If I'm seeing a person, I'm only seeing one person.
Rather than 5 at the same time. I think one of the great gifts of astrology is it does allow you to discuss sensitive issues, but in a detached way, because instead of saying, like, you're looking at their chart and you're just talking about the charts, instead of saying you are like this, you're saying the chart indicates you could be like this. So it does allow some of these issues to be discussed in a perhaps less emotional way.
Well, I think it encourages the person to see that this is part of them. If we go into a diagnosed, and we live in a world that has so many diagnoses where you're this and they change all the time. You're ADHD and then you're ADHD and then you're this and then all of a sudden you're that. And the chart just says, well, got a Uranus moon conjunction. What do you expect? You're supposed to be wild, oh, I've got these, so be it like I often would respond in some way to a client like that, and they go, oh, geez, they realize, oh, why am I seeing this as something? If I match it against the kind of system that's out there that says you should be this and you should be that, at this age, you should be doing this and you should be weighing this and you should be looking like this, and your blood pressure should be this. I always say, well, listen, I'm a high blood pressure person. Mars, Pluto, conjunction. Not going to think that I'm going to have a low blood pressure.
Yes.
So it's not that I'm denying the incredible productivity and essence and help of the medical systems. I'm just saying that psychologically, it's oftentimes, available to be seen as part of our character. This is part of our character, it's a symptom that tells us about our character. It's not a symptom telling us something wrong with our character. So I always think if there's something wrong, it's a cure that wants to know about itself,
Yeah.
Oh, I never say to people, oh, well, this is what you could do. I say, well, let's talk about that. Like, what's the symptom? What is that telling us about ourselves?
Mm.
So you use the word detached. It's like I never feel I'm detached when I do an astrological consultation. I think I'm separate, but at the end of the day, you realize there's so much that you also has stirred in you, and that's what I think makes a good consultation.
That's really interesting. Separate is a good word. That's probably rather than detached, because you're involved.
You're involved, yeah. I think you have to be involved, because if you're detached and you're just sort of sitting from Mount Olympus looking down and saying,
yeah. I mean, what's exciting is you look at the chart, but doing a reading is people know their lives. They provide the color. They provide the stories, and that's what I particularly, personally enjoy. And astrology, having your chart read, is validating and reassuring, because it tells you that you are unique, which you are, and you're not like everybody else, and you can be guided to be more of a balanced expression of the person that you are. I'm curious. I've got two more questions, but I'm curious, because your partner is a family therapist, and these situations where people come to you, clearly they're driven. Some people will come just out of curiosity. Some will come because there is an issue that they want to get solved. So were you doing these sessions together? So like you were doing the astrology, and your partner was there with like dealing with other tools, I guess, to try and help the families or the couples to find more harmony.
well, no, we were both doing the astrology.
Okay. Oh, you both
doing. We're both were the astrologers, but we found it was helpful, mostly helpful in terms of couple counseling, because we'd have a couple. I'd see usually one partner, she'd see the other partner, and then we'd come together. So there'd be 3 sessions, and so it worked in that way more. But that's when the couple would come. Very rarely couples would want to come for the one partner would want to know, and oh, I want to talk about my relationship. But I always found that very difficult, because if the other partner wasn't there, well, how would we sort that out? So we only when there was couples, we could do that together, and that's what they wanted.
Yeah, that's very very powerful. Okay, we're almost out of time, and the last question I ask all of my guests, because this is called the Finding Equilibrium show, and I suspect I know what you're going to say, but I may be wrong. But when I ask you that question, what does finding equilibrium mean to you? What would you respond?
Well, first of all, I'm more interested in what you thought I'd respond. Well, what did you think?
No. You
No. But you'll tell me.
I will tell you. I'll tell you after.
Well, first of all, I was going to respond in an astrological way. I've got 4 planets in Libra, finding equilibrium. So the answer to your question is, I gave up a long time ago trying to find equilibrium, because it never seemed to happen, just when I thought it happened. So I see it now more as a kind of holistic kind of picture. And, like I'm kind of on a teeter-totter, and it moves like this. And when it's out of whack, I try to think that, okay, what is that? And sometimes then when I'm in the other phase, the manic phase, I think I'm also trying to consider what is at the root of that. So I would say that in the imbalances of my life, I'm trying to figure out the kind of root. I think the idea for me of equilibrium talks about equality. And so to me, equilibrium is given enough time for the negative as sometimes the positive. So giving enough time for me to be on my own as enough time to be with everyone else, enough time to reflect on the memories of my life, enough time to reflect on where I'm going. So I find it more, the equilibrium is this idea of giving equality to parts of myself that may have got shortchanged in the past because of things I thought I should be doing, things I thought that were right. Yeah.
Amazing answer. Very different to what I would have said, actually, which was a lot. I was going to pick up on the Libra, but that was about the only similarity. But Brian, thank you for your time today. Let me acknowledge you not just for our conversation today, but for everything you've done to contribute to the collective knowledge in astrology for for a long time. Where can people find out more about you? Where can people find your books, book readings if you still do readings? I'm sure a lot of people are going to be interested in because we're all part of families, as you say, you never leave. and families are a huge source of stress for many people, relationships with siblings, with parents, just through the work I do, I know that is often a huge source of stress for people. So where can people find out more about?
Well, we have our website, www.astrosynthesis.com.au. At this point, I don't take on any new clients because I have a lot of regulars, and also do a lot of tutorials for students. So that takes up so much of my time. My books are on they're all on Amazon. So just look up amazon.com.au and put in my name and you'll find them. Astrology. And there's one on family called I forgot now, I've got it flustered. But there's one on family I've written, and that's on there. You've got all that stuff. It's called
okay, I'll find it and I'll put the links in the notes, in the show notes.
Yeah, and just to say about Libra, well, Libra's also, it is trying to find balance, but it's always trying to find balance through someone else rather than itself. This is a great dilemma. And does need relationship, and then when it has it, doesn't need it anymore. So there's always a back and forth with Libra. Thank you, Lawrence. You've been great, and I really appreciate meeting you and appreciate what you do. So thank you so much.
No, and thank you everyone for listening. And we'll be back very soon. See you next time. Thanks so much.